Another critical primary day looms. Voters in Florida and Ohio could shake up the presidential campaign. Trial at the Vatican. Testimony resumes over leaked documents. Protecting Christians and other refugees. Congress considers a genocide resolution. And remembering Mother Teresa, her journey towards sainthood. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 14th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and there are primaries tomorrow in several swing states, including Florida and Ohio. For Republicans, those are winner-take-all states, no delegates left for second place. That could be a problem for Marco Rubio and John Kasich. They both need to win their home states. A new Quinnipiac University poll shows Donald Trump beating Rubio in Florida 46 to 22%. That same poll shows Trump tied with Governor Kasich in Ohio 38% each, but a different poll by Monmouth University puts Kasich ahead by 5 points. Jason Calvi traveled to Ohio on this eve of the big vote. He joins us now from the campaign trail. Jason?
Brian, tomorrow is so important for the Republican nomination. If Trump can sweep all of the states, he's on the path forward to winning the Republican nomination. But if he loses in the swing states of Florida and here in Ohio, it looks like this race is going all the way to the convention. Now today, Ohio's Governor John Kasich got the backing of 4 former Ohio State football coaches as well. Not a formal endorsement, but Mitt Romney is rallying with Kasich too.
Unlike the other people running, he has a real track record. He has the kind of record that you want in Washington, and that's why I'm convinced that you're going to do the right thing tomorrow.
Now, if John Kasich wins his home state and Marco Rubio wins his home state of Florida, it would stop Trump from having enough delegates to win the nomination. That sets the stage for a contested convention, where the delegates pick the nominee at the July convention. Now, on the Democratic side, Senator Bernie Sanders is here in Ohio today, and he says he's going to have a huge turnout. He's predicting a victory in Ohio, but remember, he is down by about 8 points in the Real Clear Politics average of the polls. But Brian, I want to remind you, remember Michigan, where he was down by 20 points, and he did have an upset victory there in Michigan, the neighboring state here from Ohio.
All right, Jason Calvi in Steubenville, Ohio. And as Jason mentioned, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton try to attract voters in Ohio. They held a town hall meeting last night in Columbus, both talking about the racial divide in America. Clinton says young African-American men are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and incarcerated.
We've got to be honest with ourselves. We have systemic racism that is really at work inside the criminal justice system.
The American people are tired. Blacks, whites, all of us are tired of seeing unarmed people getting shot.
Sanders says America jails more people than any other country. He calls for comprehensive criminal justice reform. The latest polls show Clinton leading Sanders in Florida and in Ohio. We plan extensive coverage of tomorrow's primaries, and still ahead tonight, candidates respond to violent outbreaks at Donald Trump campaign rallies. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Potential Supreme Court nominees already feel the heat as the president prepares to make a nomination at any time. Lauren Ashburn is following the fierce political battle over the vacant seat on the High Court.
Brian, the president spent part of Sunday in the West Wing reviewing potential nominees, and today, groups like the RNC are taking aim. Rumored Supreme Court nominee Jane Kelly, an 8th Circuit Court of Appeals judge, is already under fire, and she's not even nominated. In the fight to replace Justice Antonin Scalia, the Conservative Judicial Crisis Network's president, Carrie Severino, published an article in National Review saying Kelly cut a plea deal for a child predator. The Republican National Committee is launching its own campaign. In the fight to keep a conservative on the bench, the RNC said it will target vulnerable Democratic Senate candidates and Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, an announcement that didn't sit well with the White House.
You have the Senate Judiciary Chairman saying that he won't consider the credentials of the nominee, but yet you have the head of the Republican Party saying that they're going to look deeply at the credentials of the president's nominee that he puts forward. That is that is clear evidence that Republicans are much more focused on politics than they are their constitutional responsibilities.
Brian, the RNC will partner with America Rising Squared. It's an outside group targeting Democrats.
Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Thank you, Lauren. The first testimony comes this week in the Vatican's controversial trial over leaks of confidential documents. Mary Shovlain has a preview tonight from Rome.
Brian, 5 people will be on trial. 2 journalists who are accused of putting pressure on a Vatican Monsignor to obtain and publish confidential documents. That Monsignor and 2 other people on the Financial Commission are also on trial. They are accused of giving the journalists that information. The trial resumed today after a 3-month delay while judges examine new evidence that had been brought to light. Media groups, though, around the world are denouncing this prosecution of these journalists. They, the journalists, wrote books based on these leaked documents detailing what they call mismanagement in the Vatican. They could all face up to 8 years in prison if convicted. Meanwhile, the Spanish-born Vatican Monsignor is back in Vatican jail after violating the terms of his house arrest. He communicated with the outside world. The testimony may be uncomfortable for him in the coming days, given that details are expected to emerge about a one-time close friendship between him and the lone woman on trial, Francesca Sciacqui. For now, from Rome, Mary Shovlain, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mary. And Congress is set to vote on a resolution calling violence against Christians in the Middle East genocide. Supporters say they want the Obama administration to do the same. Wyatt Goolsby is following tonight's vote from Capitol Hill. Wyatt?
Brian, House members supporting this bill, Resolution 75, say the goal is to make it clear ethnic and religious minorities are suffering. And this bill uses strong language, citing terms like war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide.
Since ISIS stormed into western Iraq in 2014, they've captured, tortured, and killed tens of thousands. They target Christians, Yazidis, and other minority groups, calling for their extermination. The persecution has led to a refugee crisis as Syrians and Iraqis flee their native homeland. Now, congressmen like Jeff Fortenberry say it's time to call it what it is: genocide. The bill has over 200 bipartisan co-sponsors. Nina Shea, an international human rights lawyer, says it's time for the U.S. to step up to the plate.
It's to protect the victims. It's to prevent genocide from happening again in the same way. And it's to give a sense of justice to the world about what has happened.
Declaring genocide would have legal consequences. That's why John Kerry says the administration is still considering whether or not they will use the term.
The president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, is calling on people of faith to add their names to an online petition. It's stopthechristiangenocide.org. He also says, quote, the people of God must speak up for our brothers and sisters in the Middle East. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby at the Capitol. Thank you, Wyatt. That vote comes as the State Department faces increasing pressure to meet this week's deadline to declare genocide. Catherine Szeltner is here tonight as the State Department still has not reached its decision.
Brian, Secretary of State John Kerry has until Thursday whether or not to declare genocide. The State Department says Kerry is still collecting and evaluating all available information before making that decision. The State Department spokesperson says a decision will be made soon without saying if it will meet the congressional deadline. I asked about evidence for genocide laid out in a recent report from the Knights of Columbus and in Defense of Christians.
It listed 1,100 Christians by name who were killed, churches that were destroyed, rapes, and other crimes against Christians. Can you expand where exactly the State Department is in defining genocide?
There's no doubt about it that this group continues to be capable of just, raw, pure, brutal murder and torture. But we're going to take this. We're going to take this seriously. And the Secretary is going to take the time he needs to make the best determination possible.
Spokesperson John Kirby went on to say any allegation this decision is being slow-rolled because it may mean further military action is baseless. If the State Department declares genocide, it would mark the second time the U.S. administration reaches that conclusion in an ongoing conflict. The first time was in 2004 when Secretary of State Colin Powell declared genocide in Darfur. Brian?
Good question, Catherine. Very vague answer, though. Thank you. Well, in a recent magazine article, actress Amy Brenneman shares her abortion story. She claims she doesn't regret her abortion and is speaking out because abortion is under attack. She cites a Supreme Court case that challenges a Texas abortion law. The Cosmopolitan article prompted a response from Representative Diane Black of Tennessee. Representative Black joining us from Capitol Hill. We know this is a busy time, and we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's good to be with you.
What was your response from Cosmopolitan magazine when you asked to publish a response to Amy Brenneman's article?
Well, they told us they were not interested in the response, which was very disappointing.
Now, you found another venue, and you started out by sort of connecting with her stand, finding some things in common. Why did you take that approach?
Well, I think all too often those who are pro-life come across as if they don't care about women who have had to make those tough decisions. And having been personally in a situation where I had 2 children and a third one on the way and a husband that was dealing with the demons of alcoholism leaving me, I had a choice to make as well. And so I know what difficulty there is in making those choices, and I think that we need to be aware of and walk with women who have made those choices. But I also believe that we need to make sure that women have all of the information before they make those choices, and I don't think that's happening today in abortion clinics.
And when abortion is framed as female empowerment, how is that not telling the whole story?
Well, the first female empowerment is the right to life. And when there is an abortion and a little girl's life is wiped out, that's no empowerment at all is going to take place in that situation. So I believe that is the first empowerment, is the right to be born. And I believe that that's what we need to tell as we tell people about the truth of what abortion is. And, you know, when I graduated from nursing school over 40 years ago now, we didn't know when life began. And now we know that it's a conception, and that we do have a life that is worthy of keeping. And this is the war on little girls when we're aborting them.
And isn't it true that more little girls are aborted than boys?
Well, that is so, and we are seeing more and more of that, not necessarily here in the United States, although that could be the case here in some circumstances, but throughout the world we're seeing that. And so if we really want a war on women, we will begin with the war in the womb of allowing her to have life to begin with.
And the Texas law that's being debated here, there's really 2 parts. Explain them briefly, and why is this so controversial?
Sure. Well, the first is that a physician abortionist who is performing this procedure should have privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of where the abortion is being performed, and that's in case there is a complication. The second would be that we would have an opportunity to have these clinics be under the same safety standards as any other ambulatory care center. I don't know how you can argue against that. You talk about a war on women. Is that to say that this surgical procedure should have any less safety precautions, any less cleanliness than any other clinic where another procedure would be done? I think that's truly a war on women. So it's these 2 issues that are being discussed right now. And I think that really for me they're common sense issues. Again, as an emergency room nurse, I have experience with a young lady who had an abortion done by someone from out of state, leaving her a 1-800 number where there was not an answer. And she showed up in our hospital a little too late because we lost her life to an abortion that was botched. And so I think that women deserve that, and we should be giving those same standards and the same medical standards that we give for any other procedure.
Well, thank you for your unique perspective, Representative Black. We appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, responding to political violence, physical attacks on the campaign trail, and an underwater church that's suddenly re-emerging. Pope Francis addresses situations that shed shadows on our lives and lead us to ask difficult questions. During morning mass today at the Casa Santa Marta where he lives, the Pope mentioned a homeless man who recently died of the cold in Rome. He also remembered the missionaries of charity killed in a terrorist attack in Yemen. Thank you for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and candidates from both parties criticized Donald Trump for potentially fueling violent clashes at some of his campaign events. It was a rough weekend in politics, literally and figuratively. After Friday's violence in Chicago, a protester tried to rush the stage at a Trump rally in Ohio. Officials arrested the man who Trump accused of having ties to ISIS. In an interview with CNN, the protester strongly denies any such ties.
Donald Trump is a bully, and he's willing to destroy this country for power for himself.
Candidates on both sides of the aisle reacted to the violence by criticizing the tone of Trump's campaign.
What Trump has done is like a case of political arson.
He has turned the most important election in a generation into a circus.
Trump shrugs off responsibility for violence at his events, but he has said he'd pay legal fees for supporters who assault disruptive protesters. NBC's Chuck Todd asked Trump if that offer would extend to a supporter of his who was arrested last week.
I've actually instructed my people to look into it, yes.
That response drew a scathing rebuke from Bernie Sanders Sunday.
What that means is that Donald Trump is literally inciting violence with his supporters.
Sanders also rejected Trump's suggestions that his campaign is sending protesters to disrupt Trump rallies.
Trump is a pathological liar.
Republicans also sounded off, including John Kasich, who has mostly stayed away from attacking the frontrunner.
There is no place for a national leader to prey on the fears of people who live in our great country.
Meanwhile, Pope Francis condemned Sunday's terror attack on an Ivory Coast beach. 15 civilians and 3 soldiers died in the attack, along with 3 of the attackers. An al-Qaeda group claims responsibility. The Pope sends condolences to the victims' families and says that he is praying for the dead. An Amtrak engineer tells investigators he saw a bend in a rail just before the train derailed this morning in Kansas. Investigators say the engineer applied the emergency brake, but it was too late. More than 140 people were on board the train. Amtrak says 32 were taken to hospitals. 29 had been released by late morning. The train was en route from Los Angeles to Chicago. The Coast Guard warns boaters in Texas to stay off the Sabine River. It's rising high and running fast after days of heavy rain in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Thousands of people have been evacuated, and things could get even worse. It may be tomorrow night before some rivers crest. An underwater church in Mexico is resurfacing. The ancient Catholic church is a relic from the era of Spanish conquistadors. It was built around the 16th century. The church and the entire town of Jalapa Viejo was submerged in 1962 to make way for the Benito Juarez Dam. Since then, the church has emerged 3 times as severe droughts bring the reservoir water level down. Up next, $1 million prize. Pope Francis announces a big payday for a teacher and remembering Mother Teresa's legacy on her path to sainthood. Pope Francis announces the winner of the 2nd annual Global Teacher Prize. A Palestinian primary teacher who encourages her students to renounce violence wins $1 million. There were 8,000 applicants for the honor. In his video message, Pope Francis hails the importance of education. And Francis marks his 3rd anniversary as Pope Sunday by giving away 40,000 copies of St. Luke's Gospel. The Holy Father encourages people to read a short passage every day so mercy will be in their hearts. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. A religious protection proposal awaits action in Missouri's House tonight. It easily passed in the state Senate last week. Roger Severino, director of DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at the Heritage Foundation, is with us tonight. What does this proposal do to protect religious freedom?
It prevents government discrimination against religious institutions simply because we believe marriage is a union of one man and one woman. What we don't want is government stripping tax-exempt status, accreditation, licenses, or grants from these religious institutions who simply want to live out their beliefs in the public square. So we'll see, for example, in Washington State and Oregon, bakers and florists have been fined out of business because they cannot in good conscience participate in same-sex wedding ceremonies. Catholic Charities in Boston and DC was stripped of their adoption licenses because they believe that every child deserves both a mom and a dad.
So it's kind of a preemptive strike in a sense, but this is very serious in the sense that they're trying to amend the state constitution. Does that give this any more weight than similar legislation elsewhere?
Yes, it's a strong move because religious liberty deserves constitutional protection. We've seen most clearly with the Obergefell decision that activist judges will often move to erode religious liberty. So if you add a constitutional protection, it is much stronger than simply a statute, and has the added benefit of locking in the protections so that future generations could always benefit from their rights.
So many of these laws have been challenged in the courts. Do you expect a legal challenge of this if it passes and is signed by the governor?
Well, ironically, this bill is designed to prevent legal challenges, to eliminate the divisions we're seeing with businesses being sued when there's another business down the road that could provide that same flower arrangement or the same cake. So it's ironic that we'll see that some people on the opposite side maybe will want to sue, but I hope they'll think better of it.
Do you think other states might follow suit if this gets through?
Well, Georgia is certainly considering their own First Amendment Defense Act style proposal, which this is one of them, other states as well. And I think it's a good move. After the Supreme Court redefined marriage for all 50 states, you should expect some pushback from the people, and we're seeing that now.
What about at the federal level? Will this affect anything at the federal level? Do you think it puts pressure on any branch of our government to do something to be more protective of our religious rights?
Yes, I think we're seeing a groundswell of support now. So the First Amendment Defense Act is actually a federal proposal introduced by Senator Lee and Congressman Labrador, which does precisely the same thing I mentioned earlier with Missouri. It prevents government from discriminating against religious institutions because of their beliefs about marriage. And that's good policy whether it's at the federal level or at the state level.
Roger, is it just me, or are our religious freedoms, the religious liberty that we have enjoyed as Americans since America was founded, are they threatened now more than ever?
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. So we've seen it with the contraceptive mandate case, where nuns are being forced to provide abortion-inducing drugs. The Little Sisters of the Poor have taken their case all the way to the Supreme Court, and this is another manifestation of, unfortunately, overbearing government trampling upon the rights of people of faith. People of faith have the right to express themselves in the public square, even if others disagree. That's what tolerance really means.
Before we let you go, just give us a little glimpse of what the DeVos Center does there at Heritage.
Sure, we focus on marriage, life, and religious liberty. Ryan Anderson is one of our stars. He wrote the book on marriage, which was cited by the Supreme Court in the dissents. Now, hopefully with time, with new justices, he'll actually be cited in the majority. But we focus on marriage and policy issues because we believe everybody should have all the logical, reasonable arguments to present their case to the public and hopefully convince legislators, policymakers, and the public.
Roger Severino from the Heritage Foundation. Good to see you again, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mother Teresa of Calcutta will be officially cleared for sainthood tomorrow. The nuns who continue her work say her compassion for the sick and poor is still felt around the world today. Mother Teresa was inspired to found the Missionaries of Charity in 1946 while traveling by train in India. Since then, the order has opened more than 130 houses worldwide to care for the needy and sick.
Mother's legacy was of wholehearted and free service to the poorest of the poor. And this service is carried on in our homes here in Calcutta and also around the world.
She is fondly remembered in Calcutta, where she first started her work. This woman says she still remembers when Mother Teresa would visit her family. The Albanian nun would bathe her and do her hair while her mother cooked. Mother Teresa is buried at the Mother House in Calcutta, where she lived in a hot, tiny room above the kitchen. Her tomb attracts visitors from all around the world every day.
To actually have met and spoken to a saint is very precious to me, and I have sort of memorabilia from Mother, things that she has written. And I suppose it's how many people in their lives can ever say that they will have met a saint?
Mother Teresa won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. She is expected to be canonized later this year. Blessed Mother Teresa, soon to be saint, pray for us. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. You can watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night